I want to thank everyone first off for attending this event tonight. I know it can be tough when we're already spending a lot of time on our computers during the day for work and school. So to come back on for something social is very appreciated, especially to support authors and independent bookstores. We love it. So thank you so much. For those of you who aren't local, Belmont Books is an independent bookstore in the greater Boston area in Belmont. We have a pretty robust event schedule with everything being virtual. So I hope you'll check out some of our future events. Next week, on the 11th, we have a picture book launch with Julie Berry, who's a wonderful author. And we're happy to have her again. But she's launching her picture book with Holly Haddam, who is the illustrator. And the book's called Cranky Right Now, which I feel like we can all identify with from time to time. And then on the 12th at 7:30, we have an event with Jennifer Steele in conversation with Alex George, and that's more historical fiction. Jennifer Steele's book is called Exile Music, so we hope you'll join us for that. And then I'm going to introduce both of these wonderful writers. They are going to chat for a while, and then I will be back to help with Q&A. So if you have a question for either author, Maryanne or Jessica, you can submit a question down in the little Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It looks like two little speech bubbles. So feel free to submit any questions or compliments that you want to give to Maryanne or Jessica. So we
Thank
will,
you.
yeah,
We
we
like
will,
compliments.
Yes,
um,
anything at all.
anything.
Recipes.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
So Jessica Keener is the author of the national bestselling novel Night Swim and a collection of award-winning short stories, Women in Bed. Her work has appeared in O, the Oprah magazine, Red Book, and the Boston Globe. She's taught English literature and writing at Brown University, Boston University, the University of Miami, and Grub Street. She lives in the Boston area. And then the author we're all here to see tonight, Maryanne O'Hara. She is the author of the novel Cascade, Little Matches, is based on 9livesnotes.com, a blog that Maryanne kept while her daughter Caitlin waited for a lung transplant. She also lives in Boston. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you, and I will be back in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jessica. It's so nice
So
to
I
see
know,
you.
Maryanne, looking forward to talking. We know each other, and I know you wanted to start off with a short
Yes.
video.
I'll show the little video,
Okay, I think,
my book trailer. It gives people a good sense of the book if they don't know it, and then we can go from there. So I'm going to share the screen.
I think it's great too.
Gives you a good sense.
Yeah, it does.
Why is this showing? Okay. After I lost my daughter Caitlin, I looked for revelation. I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the hard questions. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does consciousness survive death? Does my existence serve any real purpose? Does anyone's? So I wrote Little Matches from inside real-time grief, and I asked those big life questions. Caitlin became a real sage for all of us. She had so much wisdom. And the last couple of years, while she was waiting for her lung transplant and she was on oxygen, it was easier to write than to speak. After her passing, many of her friends shared her writing with me, including text messages, conversations that would have been lost forever were recorded. So all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. I know I'm not the first person to lose what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time, and lose hard. Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what?
Well, I just think that is it's so incredibly beautiful and powerful. And
Thank you.
I, I have to just say that I did not meet Caitlin in person
No, you
ever.
didn't. You
Um,
didn't. Yeah.
no, I never met her. I know when we first got to know each other, it was when your first book came out, your novel, Cascade. And then I remember we met at a cafe and you told me about your daughter. And she had the, cystic fibrosis and all that. And she was living downtown in Boston. And we sort of figured out that we traveled in very similar circles because I had had a chronic illness and lived with it for several years, but I had a bone marrow transplant that was successful. And so
Okay.
obviously a different outcome. But I spent a lot of time in the same hospitals at Children's. I know the garden that you talked about that Caitlin was trying to save at Children's Hospital, and that's of course in the book. And then later, just finally, when you started to the blog, um, and I started to hear Caitlin's voice, and I
Yeah.
started to feel that I was getting to know her. You all moved, for 2 years, right? And
Yeah. That,
to be at the hospital, it was 2 years, right?
yeah, we were in Pittsburgh for 2 years. Yes.
Right. So, and I remember just, you making that decision and not wanting to take the chance of being stuck, if there was a snowstorm and suddenly you got a call for, a viable lung, to just to not to have that, possibility. So
Right.
I don't know, it was so much of my experience in some ways has been watching you through your posts and Facebook things, the blog, hearing about how you're doing in Pittsburgh and all that. Um, and then of course Caitlin died, and and then it was just, here we are. And then you wrote this book. And so when I read this book, like so many people who are reading this book, I think I read it in, I don't think it was 2 days. I think it was maybe a day and a half. I absolutely couldn't put it down. Um, I read it till as late as I could and had to go to sleep, and then I couldn't wait to get up in the morning. So I guess I want to start off with just talking about this sense of universality to your sense of loss. I mean, I think what's so powerful about your book is obviously your love for Caitlin, which I also want to talk about because I think it's a very unique relationship that you had and have.
Mm-hmm.
I say that in the present tense. Um, and maybe we'll just start there. I mean, just in terms of your relationship with your daughter and um,
Sure. Well,
how
I had a
unique
great
and
relationship with Caitlin, and I think a lot of that was due to the fact. I mean, we obviously just had a natural click that happened from the minute she was born. However, when you are a sick young child, you do bond with the parent who stays in the hospital room with you. So we had a lot of time together that a lot of parents wouldn't have with a child. Um, and also being sick from the earliest ages makes you an older soul, I think, for sure. It makes you wiser, makes you think about the important things. So we always spoke in a frank, honest way. We had a close relationship. If we had a fight, it was like a snow squall. It was over in 2 seconds. And obviously that comes across in the book. And as far as the
Mhm.
universality, for sure, writing the book, I didn't want to write it for myself. Like I know the story. I didn't need to relive it. But when I wrote those blog posts, especially after her passing, I wrote very honestly about what it was like and what was happening. And I shared a lot of Caitlin's words and wisdom. And people really responded. Strangers really responded. And
Mhm.
people asked for a book. And finally, 9 months after her passing, I just thought, well, if writing a book will help people, then I want to do it. And also, blog posts, you put something out into the ether and off it goes. But at least a book exists. It
Mhm.
has a Library of Congress number. It's a
Mhm.
permanent thing, and so it felt like the right thing to do. But also, again, speaking to universality, it wasn't enough for it to just be a book about us and our small story, because as I write in the book, at one point when Caitlin was being reevaluated for transplant in Pittsburgh, this one woman was telling me her story, and I was just so overcome with self-pity and pity for her and pity for everybody, really. And I just said, there are so many hard stories. We are just one of them. And so it was important to me to make this book, to make our story universal, because it is universal. We are all human. We are all temporary. We live an arc of a lifetime that's rather brief. And we all live with what I lived with what Caitlin lived at some point in our life, even if it's at the very end of our life.
Well, I think what I respect about your story, and speaking to that, is that you've addressed illness as part of life. And I think, as someone who did live with illness for a long time, I started to, I had that feeling, kind of angry sometimes, but sort of a feeling of insistence that, hey, life goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're sick, it doesn't mean you're not having the whole range of emotion, or that you should be other or outside of our regular world. And I
Right.
wonder if you found yourself sometimes struggling with that, that, Caitlin and you together, as the mother, people either not identifying with you, or
Oh, yeah.
you talked about having pity, which I'm sure you didn't want at all. Um,
No, definitely not. And yet, on the other hand, Caitlin lived with invisible illness for so long, and so many people do.
mm-hmm,
We all live with invisible something, some kind of hurt, some
right.
kind of pain, something,
Mm-hmm,
regardless of whether it's a serious, physical illness. And but for Caitlin, when she finally started to need oxygen 24/7, she said it was actually a relief. She had dreaded it all her life. Oh my God, what if I ever get to that point where I need oxygen all the time? And yet, once she actually needed it, she felt this relief, because she was like, now I look as sick as I feel, and people can
mm-hmm,
understand and give me a little bit of a break. Because it was hard for her. She was 11 years old and she was really sick. She spent a couple of months in the hospital. She had half of her lung removed. It was a very dangerous time in her life. And I
mm-hmm.
remember we were at Children's Hospital in Boston, and I remember Sheryl Crow came to do like an impromptu concert for
Really?
the kids. And and Caitlin was so excited because she was old enough too. She was 11. She knew who Sheryl Crow was. She thought it was cool. And yet she was shunted aside because she looked like a kid who was just in there for, tonsillectomy, to make way for the kids who,
Mm,
looked sicker and worse, just as sick as she was, but she didn't look sick. And I just remember the sad little look on her face. It just
mm,
hurt my heart, because it wasn't, she looked so normal. Like her whole life, people would be like, "Oh my God, Caitlin looks so great. She looks great
mm-hmm.
today."
Oh, she's
Well,
very beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, but 20% lung function can look great, but it's not. Her lungs were pretty badly damaged, and once a major organ starts to go, well, you can't always tell.
Well, so as 11-year-old, how did she manage and process? I mean, that's just so young, and to go through
Yeah.
something that extreme. I mean, it seems like there's so many different stages in her life of once again, renegotiating her illness with life, um, and her
Yeah.
relationship.
I include a lot of her own writing in the book, and at one point there is a part in the book where she's writing to somebody and saying, when I was 11 years old, I was very sick and I did a lot of thinking, and um, I feel like that was when I grew up, because I just started having thoughts that most 11-year-olds don't really have, and it was like the year I stopped being a kid. And
Mhm,
certainly for me as her mom, I recognize that too. Before that time, if she had to go in the hospital or she was sick, she didn't really, it was just part of her life. But at one point, she was literally tethered by tubes that were keeping her lung inflated to a wall, and she couldn't be
Mm. Wow.
untethered from that for a few weeks, and it was horrible. So yeah, that was a time in her life that changed her for sure. Hi, you're frozen. Okay, technical difficulty.
And from friends. I wonder too if, and I know I experienced this, where she really had to wend her way through finding the right people to surround herself with, the people who could meet her on her level and have the kind of depth of,
Well, she she didn't really, I mean, I think that she always made good friends. So, her
Mhm.
closest friends were people from earliest childhood, school days, and fortunately, she didn't really have to like seek people like that out. She didn't exactly love the first college she went to in Washington D.C. Um, but
Mhm.
for most of her life, she had wonderful elementary school and high school years and made wonderful friends, and it's a community that we're still part of. So we've
Yeah,
we've
I
been
can
we've
feel
been
that, and it's in the
fortunate.
book too.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
been fortunate with the
it's
people in
really,
our life, I must say.
yeah,
Grateful
I
for
really,
that.
really do. And I think that's part of the beauty of your book too, is this sense of community, and it continues. Um, So I also wanted to know, you asked the central question, where is she? And is there more to life than this life?
Hmm.
Um, this is the kind of stuff that I know for a long time I kept very close to my chest and didn't talk a lot about. And I love that you're so open about it, that you're, in the book, you talk about wondering if there's something after life, if she's here with us now. Um,
Hmm.
and when did that start for you? I mean, is that something that sensibility, has that been with you for a very long time? I know you've done Reiki, and maybe you've kind of stepped outside of some normal things.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, as a young person, very young, I was very much an atheist, and then as I got older, I was mostly agnostic. And Caitlin was the one as a teenager who got interested in astrology and soul things and all that. And when she
mhm,
started to get sick, I felt like I was sort of gifted with that famous Brian Weiss book, and he has such amazing credentials. I think Yale and Columbia medical degrees, and came into the whole subject of past life research very, very reluctantly. And again, I feel like I stumbled upon his book, but it felt like a gift because I read it, and he seemed like if you believed him, then he had, some valid things to say. And I gave the book to Caitlin at a time when she was starting to get sicker in her, like late teens, early 20s. And it was
mhm,
a whole bunch of us read it, and it was comforting. It was very comforting.
mhm,
And yet, after losing her, all of it seemed like wishful thinking, obviously, truly wishful thinking. And yet, on the other hand, things were happening, very unusual synchronicities, and a lot of stuff that I recount in the book.
mhm,
And what I do in the book is I just recount what happened. Um,
mhm,
and in the early days of writing the book, I was, oh, but a few people were sort of dissuading me from talking about all that. And I thought, well, this is part of my journey. This is part of my grief journey. This is what is happening. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. And I'm also not really
mhm,
trying to convince myself of anything.
mhm,
I think false hope is the worst thing in the world. But I also think that having an open mind, especially, ha- I guess my main, sort of the whole arc of my story is that eventually I come to the conclusion, well, the fact that we exist, that all of life is so magical and we can't recreate any of it. It
mhm,
just doesn't seem like it's that much of a stretch to imagine that there's at least one level of something higher than this. Like, why not? This is all.
mhm,
This is so incredible. And actually, was just talking about this book to a friend of mine today. This is a book by a doctor who is like in his 70s now. He's retired and he's finally written this book. And he had been doing near-death experience research from his earliest days, quite by accident, kind of like Dr. Brian Weiss. And he was a lot of, the medical schools and universities he worked for tried to steer him away from it because it was just too. And he admits in the book that he feigned much more skepticism than he felt in the early days because he was so terrified of ruining his career. But he really has done some meticulous research, as a lot of people of science have. And I think it's also interesting and fascinating, like why not have an open mind?
Yeah, I feel that way completely.
If there's no reason not to believe something, why choose not to believe it? So all I can say is that the synchronicities that happen since Caitlin's passing are so astounding that I certainly have an open mind.
Yeah.
And in any case, regardless of what you choose to believe, if you sort of think about the fact that you are a soul who is here to grow your soul, well, then what can you learn from that? Are you on a path that gives this life you're living right now meaning? It's a really important, valuable lesson to think about. Because so many people live on the treadmill and get to the end of their life and they're like, what did I do with my life? One of the best emails I've received since the book came out was a woman who said she stayed up all night reading it and said, what am I doing? I'm quitting this dead-end job. And then she texted me or emailed me a few days later and said, I'm not a crazy stalker, but I quit my job and I'm on my way to visit an old friend I haven't seen forever out west because I need to make time for what's important in life. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I think the riveting aspect about your book is the sense of the present and the preciousness of life for sure, and every moment counting. And you get to the end of the book and that continues, and in your, at least I feel that certainly. It's a lesson I think that illness can give people, or that loss can offer people, if some on the other side of the pain, or if I don't know if there's another side to the pain can be so large and consuming. But
I think that's really important, that there's so much pain and so much grief, but we live with it and it's not going to go away. But I'm also not going to sort of negate Caitlin's existence or my existence by being miserable. And one thing I like to say is that it's all a spectrum, and it's all on that same spectrum: grief, joy, love. It all can coexist. And I think that's really, really important. I will always grieve Caitlin. Yeah, I want to laugh and smile and joke about her. I mean, actually, this is just a funny little anecdote. So I did an event with Titcom's bookshop on the Cape last week. And I went to sign books there yesterday. And it's in the car. I have a little stamp of Caitlin's signature, and she would always, we called her Kitten Caitlin, and she would draw a little cat, and I made a stamp. And so I stamped the book with my signature, and Caitlin's. It says Caitlin, and then it's the cat. And they posted it on Instagram today, and they said, isn't this the best thing? Maryanne's signature and her daughter's signature from when she was a child. And I was like,
yeah.
Wasn't from when she was a child. We were a family of jokesters, and still are, really. Like, I laughed so hard when I saw that because Caitlin would have gotten a real kick out of that. And I told one of my best friends, and when we had a good laugh. Anyway, it's funny.
Well, there's a moment in the book too where I marked my little sticky here with humor, and I think it's Caitlin saying something about and you making a reference that sometimes in the worst moments is when you had your sort of your funniest times.
Hospital
Which again,
humor. Oh my gosh. I mean, you must know that, right? Anyone who spends time in the hospital knows what it's.
a lot of pranks, lots of pranks. I mean, you know, something to get yourself through for sure.
Gallows humor.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what that is.
Um, so I just the mostly companion, I guess that was
Mm-hmm.
something that. But anyway, I guess she said you put on quite a show of impressions, and you were laughing so hard. She said. So anyway, it's
Hmm.
again, what I love about this book is sort of a prism because and I do think that it's taken me a million years to understand that joy and pain can coexist, and that one doesn't negate the other, and the task is not to have one negate the other, but that they, you know, walk side by side among a million other emotions as well. And I really feel that you capture that so beautifully in your memoir.
Thank
um,
you.
and why I just loved it so much. It's very comforting. I just found your book very comforting because you spoke about a lot of things that people, I think, feel, but maybe just don't talk about. You know, the feeling of loss, or maybe, you know, oh, I thought something was funny, but I feel guilty because so and so just died, or whatever.
Right.
All those complicated um, feelings that we have in difficult moments. And I just love that you just put it out there. So I found great comfort in reading your book. Um,
Thank you.
you don't gloss anything over.
Hmm.
And I love that too. I love that you just sort of proudly say, you know, she's gone. I'm devastated. I'm crushed. I can barely breathe myself. You know, that's there, and yet there's all this celebration of her life and her friends and you. And um, so you know, the medical world. I mean, it's a tough one. And there were moments there that I also, again, really identified with, where she talked about, you know, right away when you've got a good nurse, the minute they walk in the room, and I know that feeling so well, and understood what she was talking about and what a difference it can make.
Oh God,
Um,
yes.
you know, there was one point when my mother was in the emergency department and the ED, and there was this nurse we didn't like, and this was in California, and we did ask to have someone come, because, and as soon as that other person came, everything changed. It was really remarkable. But can you talk a little bit about the certificate you got as a doula,
Sure.
um, which is about these end of life conversations? Is that right?
Well,
I'd never heard of it until you mentioned it. So
no, a lot of people have no idea what an end of life doula is. So
okay.
I am now a certified end of life doula.
Yeah.
I don't plan to change my career, but I see myself as an ambassador for them.
Hmm.
And at the very least, I like to tell people what an end of life doula is. Some people know what a birth doula is.
Hmm.
There's somebody that you can hire to help you navigate everything to do with the birth of a child. And
Okay.
we over prepare in this culture for birth. We totally under prepare for death.
Right.
Hope
Good
for the
point.
best and scramble and suffer
Good
needlessly
point.
for the
Right.
most part.
Mhm.
So, an end of life doula is somebody who can help you navigate everything from that, you know, crushing diagnosis, terminal diagnosis, to the end and beyond, really, and help your family. So,
Mhm.
imagine like the most empathic, kind, supportive assistant who can do anything that needs doing to help you deal with the fact that you're at the end of your life and you've got to deal with it all. So
Mhm.
they can help you navigate, work with your hospice team schedule. They can help you um, write a life story. They can help you plan a
Mhm.
funeral. They can walk your dog, make snacks, give hand massages, sit vigil, anything that needs doing.
Mhm.
And it's a new field and it's
Mhm.
growing very much so. But most people don't know that they even exist. I have a niece in Maine, in Portland, Maine, who's a hospice nurse. And she said, nobody knows what this is. and they would love it because they're so scared when they get that diagnosis, and
Mhm.
they don't even know what to do. And I certainly saw how horrible it is when you're in the middle of a crisis at the end of life,
Mhm.
and life still goes on. So much living still needs to be done. Like, so much taking care of the business of life needs to happen.
Mhm.
So it's a wonderful um, option for people.
Is the doula someone at the end of life doula? Is that someone who, if someone is dying in the hospital, for example, is it someone that you call in that comes? Will the doula come visit you at that time?
Oh, for
And
sure.
help facilitate conversations.
The doula can be with you to help you in any way that you need helping.
Hmm.
Um, yes, for sure. They're not medically trained. That's
Hmm.
something that, even though like my certificate came from the medical school at UVM, it's a certificate program that the medical school offers because it's Vermont too. They really understand this need for this sort of holistic approach to end of life and trying to make the end of life as comfortable
Hmm.
and easy for people as possible.
Hmm.
And it is all over the country, but it's still very new. I personally plan, I just had wanted, I felt ready to do hospice volunteering.
Hmm.
And when I heard about the doula program, I thought, well, I will take the course and then I will feel like I have a good survey of, what's going on out there in the world. And I can better speak to the state of it all when I talk about this book.
Yeah, I just, when my dad was dying, we were trying to figure out, well, is it gonna be 10 days? Is it gonna be, what's going on? And it was really hard to find the answer. And finally, it was a nurse who came in, who was a hospice nurse actually, and she said, actually, he's a few hours away from dying.
And you
Um,
didn't have any idea that it was a few hours?
Not that fast, no.
Wow.
That we thought and we thought it could be a week or, which
Right.
isn't that different in a sense, but on the other hand,
No, it is.
at that moment, I said, I want him out of this intensive care room and I want him in a quiet room and we're going to just sit with him, which is they moved him
Good.
and we sat in a quiet room and he
Mm-hmm.
died a few hours later.
Yeah.
So, but if I, that person, we were trying to find answers, but in a ICU, it's hectic and they're more focused on keeping people alive.
Of
So,
course, yes. Yeah,
um,
that's not their job.
yeah. And yet, what a difference! I mean, it was for
Right.
certainly for me in that moment. But
Right. Well, if people are interested, certainly they can just go onto Google and look up end of life doula registries, etc. There are some registries out there. There's a few good certificate programs, and
mhm.
certainly in the program I did at UVM, everyone was just so caring and wonderful. You really can't go wrong with the kind of person who wants to do such a thing.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking again of the death of even if
Mm.
just how all the people, nobody would talk. I mean, the
No, no, no.
person's in bed, he's dying his whole life, and no one
Right.
is talking real with him, and what a difference that can, will make. Um, with Caitlin, I mean, there is sort of this this difficult moment because you don't. I don't know if you've experienced this. It's there. I know, but if you want to live and you want to have hope and you want to believe that something's going to work, you don't
Right.
want to spend a lot of time thinking, well, what if this doesn't work? I mean, it's
No.
there, but um,
No, it's hard because it's definitely the elephant in the room.
yeah.
And yet I know that a lot of kids feel like they're protecting their parents by not talking about it because it's
Mm,
often the parents who are the ones who are reluctant to bring up the subject. And that's a real thing. And it's
mhm.
something that I think the medical world has to address and help. So that's actually something that I'm working on with two other people. We're going to be doing some talks. A doctor and the mother of a woman who died like Caitlin, and her memoir was published posthumously. And the three of us are forming a talk, three perspectives, one purpose, a model for collaboration in medicine, patient, parent, provider. And we're forming that talk right now to, because, you know, in my part sort of is the whole end of life aspect of it, because doctors will admit they're afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, they're not
And
talking about it at all.
and they will let you go through hell in the ICU rather than, even though they know it's all for naught.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, somebody's got to speak up, and it's so anyway, I'm looking forward to that conversation that I'll be having.
I'm glad you're doing that. It's so
Mm-hmm.
needed. I work at a hospital now, and they're
Right,
starting to talk about that kind of thing. I'm
right.
seeing that a little bit more and more. Um, but no one's helped doctors in medical school, and it's
No, and you know, and and they're trained to think it's you're failing if a patient dies, and you know
right.
the sad thing is we're this is the arc of a lifetime. You know, we're all going to die, and if we
Right.
can at least acknowledge it, it goes a long way toward living a better life right now, and also being prepared so you're not scrambling at the end.
Yeah, and this funny idea of the sense of failure. I mean, if we can look at death differently there's no failure because it's so integral to who we are in
Yeah,
life. Um, and then you honor the life more. I mean, there's more honoring of life,
exactly,
and so
exactly.
um, yeah, it's just that's a whole loaded thing. So, are you still doing your Reiki? Are you still doing Reiki energy work or?
Well, I did that as I explained in the book because Caitlin and I often experience these strange like surges of energy,
Mhm.
and I describe it in the book. And I talk about how I just took this course just to see if I could like harness it, to see if it was real, to see what if. And then when I took the class, you said you would make a commitment to do it, you know, every day for 6 months. And
Hmm.
so I volunteered at the Brigham because they have a great Reiki program. And I really enjoyed doing it. I found that the true gift of Reiki to me was, you know, closing the door, putting a sign on the door, and giving a patient 20 minutes of like kind, undisturbed,
Mm.
calming attention. And people
Mm.
loved it. They loved it so much. It's hard to be a patient. You know what it's like. And so when we moved to Pittsburgh, you know, I haven't done it. I haven't done that at the Brigham. I don't want to go back to the Brigham. But when I've also volunteered in Pittsburgh, I would sit every week with a man who had ALS,
Mm.
and he was awesome. He was really cool. We had great conversations. He was great. So I've always liked volunteering, and I'm ready to do hospice. It's just I'm just waiting for COVID to let me.
Yeah, well, it sounds like have found some, you know, sort of new, um, I don't know if I want to use the word purpose, but to me, there's a shift in terms of you from 4 years ago. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, the first year was kind of blindingly, a blind pain, really, of
right. Yeah, for sure.
all consuming and understandable. And um, I mean, I don't, it comes and goes, right? But it's always there, probably.
Right.
Um, but all this that you're talking about, the doula and this conversation, and I just think it's really, really important. And I'm really so happy that you're, at least thinking about doing it. And I
Oh,
think you're
I
going to help a
definitely
lot of
am. Yeah, for
people.
sure.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to help a lot of people, and I think, I think Little Matches is going to do the same thing. That it's offering sort of again this comforting multi-dimensional way of sort of muddling through life like we all do, um, and and you're approaching. I mean, you're addressing all of these sort of uncomfortable moments. I mean, there's just a lot of discomfort in life anyway, but I love the way that you address all of it. I think we're often
Thanks.
trying not to do that, you know. So let's see. I'm here. I'm seeing so much to come on here. Really appreciate your discussion on illness as part of life. Yeah. Um, that's absolutely one of the reasons why I love this book. There's just and I think the pandemic brought that out too. In some ways I
Oh,
sort of
for sure.
felt that everyone was stuck at home, you know, dealing with illness, and then they sort of began to understand that you actually have to just keep living, you know.
Right.
And I sort of hope, I'm putting my light on because it's suddenly getting dark in here, but um I'm sort of hoping the pandemic, I hope at least for half of the world, that it will open up some kind of bigger heart or bigger understanding of people who are going to continue once everybody's back in life, that there's this whole
Hmm.
slew of other people that will continue with their chronic illnesses, um, having to be tethered to a wall like Caitlin was with the oxygen, or checking in every you know, few
Right.
months, and living a life, but
Right.
in spite of it all. Um,
Yeah.
and just sort of embracing it more uh, as part of something that can teach us, that we can learn from all of it.
Yeah, I would love to read a bit from Caitlin,
Yes,
if
please
you
do.
wouldn't mind,
Please do.
because I think it's really great advice for anybody. Um, just have to find it. All right, so she was writing to a friend. Caitlin was newly waiting for transplant. She had been listed for 3 months, and we were hoping it would happen any day. We had no idea it would be another 2.5 years, really.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable.
So she was writing to a friend who had CF, who had had a successful lung transplant, who is still doing very well. I am reading Primo Levi's periodic table right now, and every night it's like a tonic. I only read one chapter, one element. Do you know it? I share a birthday with him, and maybe I know too much about astrology and am unfairly influenced, but I can't help but feel an incredible kinship to in relation to his writing. I have read his other memoirs of being in Auschwitz. They are hard to read, yes, but more, I feel, like a window into a study of humanity that most of us will luckily never see, but should at least read about. I've done a lot of soul searching, cheesy term, but true, the past year, and I've read a few things that have been helpful. One thing I reread was Emerson's Self Reliance, which I only remembered from college and high school. But it's cathartic to just read the philosophies that are so aligned with what I feel like I know I can trust fully and have full faith in. That is, myself, my intuition. And also Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. I am always fascinated by people who are really intelligent and intellectual, and yet still very Christian, or return to religion after a lifetime of academia. That is not me, but it interests me how these two opposing sides manage to come together. Also, this book of Tolstoy's, A Confession. It's really small, and he wrote it at the end of his life when he was practically suicidal because he was driven so insane by his inability to have faith and his in vain attempts to arrive at it logically. I've reread that many times over the years. It has a good conclusion. In what you said about surrendering, I completely agree that the moments when I have felt most free, most okay with what is happening, and least anxious have been those moments where I am able to let go and surrender. Interestingly, those moments seem to work in tandem with my faith in myself. I know I can trust myself to get through something, to hold on, and ultimately I can just let go of the rest. So I guess since we have no idea where we come from and where that strength comes from, that true belief in yourself, in your intent to be a good person, is sort of divine in itself, no more or less divine than believing in something someone else told you to believe in. I have always believed in goodness,
And I know a lot of people say that, but it does feel undeniably essential, and I don't question it. As humans, we somehow know that we should aim to be good. And where does that come from? If I can follow the fact that I can trust in the importance of goodness, then I can maybe trust that goodness will come of goodness, if that makes sense. Kind of like karma points. I have never felt like, why did this happen to me? As I am sure you haven't either. It isn't even because of some virtue that I feel that way. It just has never occurred to me to be pissed off about my lot in life or to think that there was some unjust reasoning behind it. Instead, I honestly feel lucky sometimes that I've gotten to feel and experience things that others have to struggle longer and harder to learn. I think those are the kinds of things that Caitlin writes about that are universal for sure and can help anyone handle any calamity. Um, and I certainly have found that when I try to control situations too much, it just provokes such anxiety, and that the best thing I can do is to really surrender, and just say, well, if the worst happens, I will deal with it. And when you say that to yourself, it just gives you such relief because you just figure, well, I've made my
There's a leap of
decision.
faith in that. There's faith in that.
Mm-hmm.
You're trusting something, trusting something bigger than yourself, maybe. At least that's how I
Or
see
at least trusting yourself. Like, all right, if the worst happens, I'll deal with it.
it.
And then just brace yourself. And half the time, the worst doesn't happen anyway. So,
Mm. It's just so powerful. There's the book is so full of wise words. It's just um, beautiful and powerful in that way as well.
well, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
I think we're heading toward
All
Yeah.
right.
question
Well,
time.
thank
Um,
you very much, everyone.
so we have one pending question and comment, but if any of you in the audience have any questions or comments for either author, feel free to submit them while we're answering these. So Allison has a few words and a question for Maryanne. Allison first says that she is so sorry for the loss of your daughter. And she
Yeah.
saw you several years ago at a library near Boston with Barbara Shapiro. You were speaking about your book Cascade, and Barbara was there speaking about the art forgerer, and she had a lovely evening and enjoyed both books. She's so glad to discover your new one, who picked it up from the store recently, and plans to read it over the weekend. She says, thank you for telling your story and that of your daughters. My mom passed away at age 58, which is my age now. She was chronically ill, but passed away unexpectedly in her home. I have her memoirs about her life with schizophrenia, and I'm hoping to
Mm.
publish. I wish she had someone at her side like yourself as a doula. You are making such a difference in the end of life experience. Post pandemic, will you be speaking live? And if so, do you have a schedule of events at this point? Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, Allison, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. And I'm so glad you found the book, and I hope you find it comforting. And I'm sorry about your mom. I mean, nothing is planned. Well, actually, I have a couple of things in the fall that are planned. Live Kentucky Book Festival, and I'm speaking at a university in Philadelphia. But right now, there's nothing live planned, which is weird, but I am doing actually some workshops at the end, and everything's on my website and is posted as it happens. But I'm doing some workshops at the end of May where I help people or give them tips on how to do a life interview with a loved one or with themselves. And I'm looking forward to that because I think that taking the time do to think about your life story is a great gift for the future and a great gift for your loved ones, but it's also a gift to yourself if you do it with yourself because it can really help you decide, hey, am I like that lady who quit her job? Am I living the life I really want to live? Am I on the right path? And I'm looking forward to that. So that is something it will be virtual, but you could certainly come to one of them and check my website because I plan to talk about this book for as long as anyone will listen to me. And I am planning a talk where I will be talking myself and showing visuals and having it, have like a point. And a lot of that point will be the idea of legacy and life, the importance of life stories. Everyone's got a really great story. So
Yeah,
thank you.
this isn't going to run out of time, this book, that's for sure.
Um, Kathy in the chat, who is one of the owners of Belmont Books, who made it
Love
tonight.
her.
Kathy said Caitlin was such a wise beyond her years young woman. Maryanne, did you and Caitlin ever talk about your life if she passed before you?
Caitlin was terrified of me passing.
Mm.
She actually, and I do write about that, she had a real phobia. She was pretty strong and tough, but she definitely had a fear of me passing. And when she was waiting for transplant that first summer, she dealt with a lot of anxiety. And she went to see this really great psychiatrist over at Harvard who really helped her with some cognitive behavioral stuff because she was having like a loop in her brain. And
Mm.
she knew she just needed, she didn't want to sit and talk about, she didn't want talk therapy. She wanted a way to stop that loop. And he helped her really well. He was great. But one of the things she did was a fear exercise where she wrote down, it was kind of like what I just said, what's the worst that can happen? Say, okay, I'm going to deal with it. And she did this fear exercise, and I found it after her death in her desk. And she wrote all about her fear of me dying, and what she would do if that happened. So, yeah, did I answer the question? Probably not.
I think you did. So we have another question from Maxwell, who says, it's been such a gift to spend time with your book, echoing Jessica and gratitude to
Hey.
you for normalizing and chronicling your grief so honestly in this beautiful book. I find myself recently coming to know my grandmother years after her passing in ways I never did before, and I am both surprised and comforted in the ways that it is a relationship that still continues to develop all these years later.
I love that.
That is
In
beautiful.
in many ways, Caitlin is a co-author. Could you speak to
Mm-hmm.
the ways that writing the book was an intertwining and encountering of your two voices in concert with each other? And how do you find her voice continuing to influence and shape your own as a writer?
Oh, that is just so wonderful. Thank
Beautiful
you.
question.
That's
Wow.
a great question. She definitely is a co-author. When I first was writing the first draft, it was like the only thing that felt good. It felt like I was connected to her. And I was even like, the working title said by Maryanne and Caitlin O'Hara. And her voice is such an important part of it. So I knew I needed to use her actual writings. Unfortunately, I had so much of her own writing because that's what people do now. People aren't talking on the phone, messages that are, disappear forever. They're writing emails and texts. So you have all this stuff, and it's wonderful. So she was definitely a co-author. And what was the rest of that question?
They asked how you find
Oh, how she's
Caitlin's
still.
voice continuing.
Mm.
Well, it's interesting because I can hear her, and I love what you said about the relationship grows and continues.
Mhm.
I've had that conversation with a few friends how after the death of a loved one, you realize it's not the end. They're still such a part of you, and you can hear them, and you can hear the advice, and you can almost hear the wisdom because they've lived it and they're out of here now. And you can almost hear what they would look down and say, like, "Don't sweat the small stuff," kind of thing. And
Mm.
yeah, Caitlin really influenced people so much, and so many of her close friends say that they ask themselves, "What would Caitlin say?" And the answer comes
Mm.
pretty quickly because she, yeah, she had an old soul kind of wisdom, and we probably all do, at some point. And if we really listen to it, I'm a big believer in listening to your intuition, and I think the older you get, the easier it is to listen to your gut. And you know, there's a part in the book too where she writes about instinctively what's right and what's wrong. Go with that. Let that be your compass, kind of.
Yeah,
Um,
I have that marked off actually, of inner
Do you?
guidance. She talks about that. It, you know, it, it's powerful, and it's kind of goes back to what you said too, Maryanne, about relying on, trusting yourself.
Yeah.
And
And Kathy has a final comment, where she says, I've said it before, Maryanne, but I love the book, and Caitlin's voice has really stayed with me. Thank you both for a wonderful conversation
Oh, thank
tonight.
you so much. Thank you so much for supporting this book and
I'm
having
so
it in
glad
your
you wrote this.
store. Thank you.
It's
I
really
wish it was
fun.
in person, but oh well.
Um,
And
so
now,
that,
everybody, please
yeah.
get this book. This is my earlier copy that has a billion
Look
stickers
how
on it.
beautiful the end papers are.
Yes, but now I have the hard copy too, and papers.
The end papers are so, I'm just so delighted that it's so beautiful.
It is a beautiful book.
I mean, Caitlin was a
It's
big art
classic.
person and she would love the way it looks.
It's really.
But thank you all so much for coming. We
Thank
have
you so much.
Maryanne's book in the store currently if you wanted to stop by and get one. It's
Yes,
also
and
orderable.
I'm gonna stop in and sign them.
So maybe, yeah, are you coming in tomorrow or?
I think tomorrow because you guys don't open till 12 on Saturday, is
Yeah,
that it? Yeah,
yeah.
maybe tomorrow morning.
So you could get a signed copy for what
And
we have in the store.
one for someone else that may will derive comfort from it. I know I did that. I bought it for a friend, and
Yeah, I can't believe how many people have done that. It's really
yeah,
lovely and yeah, it's nice.
And
yeah.
we do offer shipping through the United States. So don't feel limited by the fact that we're located in Belmont. But thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you to Jessica and
Thank you so much.
Maryanne.
Thank you,
It's
both
a
of you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for doing this, Jessica. It's a big
Thank
ask on
you, Maryanne, for
at night.
asking
Thank
me.
you. And thanks
And
for Belmont.
have a good night, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Take care.